In Kansas, 72% of fourth graders can't read at grade level. But what if the problem isn't the kids? It's the system that taught them. I'm Jessica Glover, and this is My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis, a documentary-style podcast about how thousands of smart, capable children are being left behind and what parents and teachers are doing about it. In this season, we trace the forgotten history of reading instruction, hear from families who were told to wait it out, and uncover how widely used methods fail to teach the most foundational skill in education. You'll meet teachers who were taught but not trained, and students who were mislabeled, misdiagnosed, and nearly gave up. But there's hope, and it's already happening in Kansas classrooms. This is a story about loss, about learning, and about what happens when people refuse to give up on kids who struggle to learn to read right now. What if your child's teacher wanted to help but didn't know how? What if the reason your bright, curious child can't read isn't about intelligence or effort, but training? I'm Jessica Glover, a mom, former reading specialist, and someone who learned the hard way that caring deeply doesn't equal being prepared. Today we meet Jeanine Phillips, a Kansas mom, a teacher, and a woman who discovered she had dyslexia the last night of her final literacy class before graduating with a degree in education. Her story connects the dots between broken systems and the kids they fail. Jeanine's realization.
Hi, my name is Jeanine Phillips. I've been working in education almost all my life now. I have a bachelor's degree in elementary education, a master's degree in adult ed, am a qualified instructor with the Academic Language Therapy Association, as well as a certified therapist. I've taught children who are dyslexic to read, write, and spell, and their educators for the past 35 years. Currently, I am the executive director at Phillips Fundamental Learning Center.
Jeanine Phillips always knew school was hard. Like other students out there with learning challenges, she just assumed she was dumb. But that didn't stop her from setting goals and going after them.
I really thought I was dumb. I really did. That was my interpretation. That's what teachers would say, things who met my family, met my parents, met my brothers, and would say things like, just not quite as smart. You have fun. I'm like, yeah. I was very social. I had a very good time in school. By high school, I knew my strengths and weaknesses, and I knew I did not read well. I spent a lot of time with cheating devices. Everybody wrote in cursive back then. So I learned to just be able to see the answers and catch those. And I spent every night studying with two friends. They knew I did not do well. We had a great time together. They cheated for me. Yeah, they knew. They knew I couldn't do it. They recognized, which I never did, that I was smart, but there was just something there. Yeah. So that was basically where I was when I entered college. I had done very poorly on my SAT score. First time I took it, I worked really hard, and I only got about halfway through during the time. So my dad then said to me, when he got the results of SAT, he said, "Did you even try?" And I said, "No, Dad." And I said, "No, I was tired. I didn't even try." He said, "Well, guess what? I've signed you up for the next one." And I thought, oh, great. So I got there early.
You probably did try really hard.
I tried really hard.
But you didn't want him to know or make him.
Yeah, no.
You wanted to make him proud.
Yeah, yeah. And I had goals. I wanted to go to KU. So those SAT scores were really important.
But it wasn't until her last reading practicum class before her college graduation with a degree in education that Jeanine Phillips finally put the pieces together. She wasn't dumb. She was dyslexic, and this would launch her into a whole new adventure as a teacher discovering her neurodivergence was the gift that made her unique. And much later down the road, drawing her into the passionate work she does today as the director of the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center.
So I went along, finally changed my major to elementary education. It took me 6 years to complete my degree working and I learned take just about 6 hours to 9 hours, no more, per semester, and I could survive it with an A in the class. Normally, I was studying until about 2 a.m. and then up to that whole time period. It was my last semester, and then we just had 3 kind of practicum courses that we completed our degree. One was the reading practicum, and one was math. I didn't do well in either. If you can't read very well, you don't do well in math. So the 2 main things you need to teach young children, I didn't do very well in. It was a night class, the reading class, a great professor. He was new to Wichita State. He had come from Yale University. And the last night, he said something about dyslexia. None of us in the class had ever heard the word. I'd spent at least 4 years with everybody to this point. So we knew each other well. We had study groups, etc. They knew me well. So anyway, he held up a piece of paper and he said, this is an assessment for dyslexia. And he said, I think the best way for you to understand is for all of you to take it. So turn it upside down. I'm going to set a timer. When the timer goes off, I start going and working really hard. Timer went off and I looked up. Everybody's done looking at me. I glance back down. I'm halfway done. So I flip it over real fast. Mortified. I'm at the back of the room, and he said, now let's talk about the experience, and let's start with you. And he pointed right at me. And the whole floor went out from under my feet. I honestly almost lost consciousness. I remember just thinking, oh my gosh, I'm this horrible word he just said. I couldn't even process dyslexia at that point. I just picked the paper up, and I learned to get through these kinds of experience by clowning. I've just always made a joke out of it. So I held it up and I said, obviously, I'm not so dumb that I don't know that 50% is like a flunking score on this. And he said, you are obviously dyslexic. That was it for me. I can't remember another thing that happened other than everybody getting up and leaving the class. He was working at his desk, and I approached him and I said, I'm sorry, I just can't leave this class, graduate next week without saying to you, how dare you do that to me in front of my peers? And by this time, he looks up and he realizes I'm choked up and I'm starting to cry. And he jumps out of his chair and he said, I thought you knew. I thought you had to have known. You are so smart. You answer all the questions. But he said, I was sure you knew. And I said, we, including myself, have never heard this word in education. Never. And I did say to him, what made you think I knew? And he said, your writing was that of a second grader. And writing's the hardest. If you struggle to read, you're really going to struggle with writing. Still, he picked it out. So I said, what does this mean for me going into elementary education? And he said, I checked your records. You have a 4.0. You're going to be fine. You're going to love on those kids. You're going to figure out how they learn, and you're going to be very sensitive to them. So go. Have a great time teaching. So I said, okay. And there was nobody to give me any more information than that. I knew nothing more about it. He didn't even realize Kansas didn't recognized dyslexia, wasn't doing anything about it, wasn't teaching in the programs because he was brand new from Yale. So never had it even crossed his mind. And Yale was the specialized center for the recognition and instruction of dyslexia at that time. So that's how he just dropped himself in Wichita, Kansas. Everybody knows about dyslexia, but no, nobody knew.
That realization was just the start. Jeanine's own struggles were mirrored in her son Cooper's experience years later.
The first concerns I had, and it was before he started school, was his language. He was very slow to say his first word. He was over 2. And I kept bringing it up to the pediatrician. The pediatrician kept saying, it's too early to worry about it. He's a boy, girls develop sooner, all that. But then as he started to develop language, it was his own language. And he said hundreds of words. For instance, butterfly was bufferfly. Animal was aminal. Sometimes he even totally flipped the syllables. That really concerned me. And I started to ask professionals about that. And again, nobody seemed to be too concerned, but he was asked to leave 3 different preschools. And the reason was because of language. They said he's immature. We can't understand his needs, his wants. He doesn't seem to understand us. You need to investigate it. So I thought, okay, with who? So I went back to my pediatrician and said, I'm deeply concerned. At this time, he was 3.5. Almost 4. And so we started looking at audiology. We started looking at speech itself. We started looking, of course, visually what was going on. He saw a guy who basically did vision tracking training, and I had to wave a little quartz in front of Coop's eyes. He was supposed to follow it, and he followed it, and he's, Mom, how's this going to make my reading any better? He couldn't recognize letters. We worked on him all the time with my elementary background. So I was very concerned with no answers coming from any professional.
Dyslexia, the invisible crisis. When we talk about how students have been misserved in this country, especially those who struggle to read, we have to start by looking at what was missing for so long. Dyslexia, one of the most common learning disabilities, affects as many as 1 in 5 children. But for decades, it went unrecognized in schools, misinterpreted as laziness, defiance, or just falling behind. The consequences? Devastating. It wasn't until 1975, 50 years ago, that the U.S. government passed the Education for All Handicapped Children Act, now known as IDEA, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. This landmark law finally required public schools to provide a free and appropriate education to students with disabilities, including those with a specific learning disability, a category that includes dyslexia. But the word dyslexia wasn't always used or understood. Many children went unidentified, unsupported, and misunderstood. Kansas was no exception. Kansas didn't formally recognize dyslexia in its state education law until April 18, 2023, when Governor Laura Kelly signed House Bill 2322, officially naming dyslexia in the state's Special Education for Exceptional Children Act. This change came after years of advocacy by parents, educators, and lawmakers. In 2018, Kansas formed a legislative task force on dyslexia. Jeanine Phillips was a member of this task force. In 2019, the Kansas State Board of Education adopted the International Dyslexia Association's official definition of dyslexia. But until recently, a child struggling with dyslexia in Kansas could complete elementary school without ever being identified or helped. These aren't just policy gaps, they're lives. They're children and families who were told their kids were just behind, not trying hard enough, or had behavior problems, when really their brains process language differently. And very few teachers were trained to identify the difference and teach the child with dyslexia to read. This systematic failure is what we're reckoning with now. And it's also the reason for hope, because when we name the problem, we can start to fix it. From student to parent. Jeanine Phillips became a teacher, then a mom. When her son Cooper entered school, she began to recognize something was wrong.
I was very concerned with no answers coming from any professional. He was 4 with failing all these preschools, and I had probably seen 6 different medical professionals, eyes, ears, speech, early speech by this time. Happened to have a preschool teacher for his 4 and 5-year-old year in Denver who was amazing. And she said to me, there's some big concerns, she said, I have here. I'm like, great, here we go again. She said, I don't know what it is, but when you step into kindergarten, you need to make sure that you bring him to the attention of the special educators. I said, okay. I said, any other thought? She said, probably ADHD. I'm thinking severe ADHD. She said, I don't know. I can't really tell. We started school in just the local public school kindergarten, and he had a terrible kindergarten teacher. She was awful. She took it very personally. She took his behavior. She took his reactions to her, to the other kids, where she finally stressed him out and created such anxiety. And she called me one day to tell me, I think you need to find out if he has a urinary tract infection because he's going to the bathroom about 50 times a day.
Oh, no.
She had never told me.
Yeah.
It didn't happen at home. So I said, great, I needed to know that. Then led to 2 exploratory surgeries. We were afraid because he had started throwing up within sight of the school building.
Oh my gosh.
And he couldn't hang there for more than an hour before I would get a call. And finally the school said, we're going to have to file truancy on you. I'm like, what do you want me to do? They said, leave him in the room with her and go home. And we'll just put a wastebasket beside him and he can. What was I thinking?
Oh my gosh.
I went along with that for about a month. And he started to lose so much weight. And that was actually when we stepped in to talk to the surgeon, to my pediatrician recommended surgery.
It's like you want to trust the teacher.
When you're a young mom, you do want to trust them. I did continue to pursue what was going on. So the first surgery, nothing. Second surgery, nothing. But that surgeon said, it's your teacher. I'm like, what? He said, no. He said, there is nothing there in what you've told me. It's anxiety from the teacher and her expectations. So then I planted myself in the room beside him the rest of the year. And the end of that year, we moved back to Wichita, and that summer between kindergarten and first grade, I worked hard with him with everything I knew to do. Tried to teach him letters, letter names, didn't even attempt the sounds. And I really didn't have any idea how to teach phonics at all. I just knew he couldn't recognize letters. So stepped into first grade, had a meeting with this team of teachers before school started and explained everything that we had gone through. By this time, we had gone on and had seen psychiatrists, psychologists, audiologists. We had gone much deeper. So 14 different medical professionals. So the reading specialist at this Wichita Public School called me in the second day of school, and she said, have you seen an educational psychologist? And I said, I've seen everything else, but she said, if I were you, I would run. I said, okay, where do I go? She knew of a psychologist, educational one, who had just moved from Florida. And she said, he's rumored to be fabulous. So my husband and I ran. And at the end of the meeting, it didn't last long, the assessment, and he called both of us in and he said, your son is profoundly dyslexic. That's the second time I had heard it in my lifetime. First one with me in college, 12 years before, and this one. So I sat there stunned, and I said, oh my gosh, is it hereditary? And he said, why do you ask? I said, because I was recognized in college, but never knew anything about it. And he said, yes, there is scientific evidence that it is very hereditary. I said, what do I do about it? Where do I go? He said, I don't know. Kansas doesn't recognize it, so I don't know what to tell you. But he said, I'm going to do some research, and you do some research. So I went back to the schools and shared, and they absolutely blew it off as ridiculous, called me a helicopter mom, said that there was nothing they had in their teaching curriculum to meet his needs, and refused him special education. So that stirred that mama bear instinct in me, and I thought, okay, I'm going to start researching and searching. So that was really how that dyslexia realization and the fact that I wasn't alone, nor was Cooper alone in this world of dyslexia in Kansas, even though we were. So, it was quite a journey to that point.
Cooper Phillips was eventually diagnosed with profound dyslexia by now retired psychologist Dr. Brian Stone, but not before years of tears, meltdowns, and confusion. Dr. Brian Stone is a Navy veteran and licensed psychologist who has spent more than 25 years helping bright kids and young adults with dyslexia find answers. With a background in school psychology, test development, and teaching at Wichita State University, he's dedicated his career to understanding and supporting struggling readers.
I was very fortunate to test mainly bright kids with lots of strengths, and usually it's a good thing, and it's nice to be able to say, no wonder I feel this way. Like little Johnny, who's 9, spatially, he's like an 18-year-old. He can think at 18-year-old levels.
Crazy.
Yeah, it gives them a better sense of self-worth, that I'm not broken, I'm not made wrong. It would be, usually I'd still rather be higher in this thing that we're doing all the time, because a kid's not going to realize, about 60 years of life will have nothing to do with the classroom, and that they'll be excellent at it, but kids are not going to think about 60 years down the road.
Yeah, it's right now, the immediate. What am I going through? And then I have to work twice as hard as everybody else to learn how to do this skill of reading.
And you can agree with them. Yeah, it's not fair, but that's how your brain is made. And these patterns are preset. They're heritable. You pretty much inherit. You're not born a blank slate. You inherit the pattern, and then the things that can be wired in are the phonological awareness, phonics rules.
Yeah.
And then that helps a lot if one can focus specifically on that, pull those up high enough to let the kid succeed well enough that they can then shine in their other areas.
Yeah.
But it can take a while, and you have to march through the marshy pond of low self-concept or judging yourself on your weak area. I've always told parents, don't wait for get an eval, but get good instruction started immediately, because a person doing the evaluation can know that, they've had alphabetic phonics for 6 months, so no wonder their phonological awareness is pretty good. And I see that their nonsense word reading has come up. Even if they've had everything, all the reading and phonological awareness come up, they're still going to have that auditory memory weakness or that processing speed, rapid retrieval weakness. That doesn't go away. These things come up developmentally. At age 6, they might be thinking like a 10-year-old, but auditory memory and rapid retrieval are at a 4-year-old level or 3-year-old level. And then 5 years later, at age 11, they might be thinking like a 17-year-old, and their auditory memory and rapid retrieval has come up to 8-year level.
Wow.
But it just goes up developmentally. And so they do have to adjust. They're going to have, their processing's going to slowly get better developmentally, but it's going to be a lifelong weakness.
So just being aware of that and accommodating, finding the way you cope is good to be aware of for kids that are dyslexic, or adults too.
And getting accommodations, like more time on tests, so the test is not measuring your processing speed, your retrieval speed, but instead can measure more of what you know.
Brian's words gave Jeanine hope. At least now she knew Cooper wasn't broken. But the daily reality was still crushing. Each day, she felt the weight of not knowing how to help her son, and she was close to giving up. Then she met Gretchen Andiel, and everything began to change.
So in the end, what I will say is I had to come to grips with the idea that nobody in the schools knew what to do. I found the one educator who knew there was a problem, a reading specialist, but she didn't know what to do. So again, the responsibility was constantly on my shoulders. I was constantly talking to people about Cooper's failing in school and continuing to have more problems psychologically every day, to the point then that I was beginning to give up on myself, even as a parent and as an educator. But then, one day, I went to a women's luncheon, and a woman said to me, "So you've just moved back to Wichita, Kansas?" And I said, "Yes." She said, "You're Jeanine Phillips, right?" And I said, "Yeah." She goes, "How do you like being back?" And I burst into tears. I jumped up from the luncheon table chair and I ran to the bathroom, and she followed me. And that was the changing point in my life. And she said, "I'm so sorry." I said, "No, it's not your fault. My world that surrounds my youngest child is collapsing, and we cannot find answers. I'm fearing for his life now. He's saying things I never thought he would ever say about giving up." And I said, "He's been diagnosed with dyslexia, and I don't know what to do." Grabbed the towel and wrote a name on that towel, Gretchen Andiel, and she wrote down her number, gave it to me, and she said, "Call her. She's been through what you've been through." I ran home and I called Gretchen. She knew exactly what to do. That was what saved my life, saved Cooper's life, saved his entire academic career. Basically, it was a curriculum and a program that was very foreign to Kansas schools. So I remained very isolated in working with Cooper, but we worked together for 4 years, and he became an avid reader, writer, and, spelling, but we get by today without having
such great technology.
Yeah, and he had incredible vocabulary, so he could put his thoughts on paper and everybody could read it. That was in the 90s. In 1992, I went to Dallas, Texas to learn how to teach him how to read. That's the mecca of dyslexia instruction. So that's where Gretchen told me to give me a choice, enrolled me in the course, came over and threatened to drive me to Dallas when I got cold feet.
That's a real friend there.
That was an amazing friend, and later became my co-founder in Phillips Fundamental Learning Center.
National roots of a local crisis. Cooper's story is one of many, and Jeanine's realization wasn't isolated. But for decades, teacher preparation programs across the U.S. promoted a belief system rooted in balanced literacy. It sounded reasonable, but it left many teachers without the tools to teach foundational reading skills. The roots of this go deep, back to the whole language movement of the 1980s and 90s. Influential educators like Lucy Calkins, Mari Clay, and Irene Fontes and Gay-Sue Pinnell championed ideas that downplayed explicit phonics in favor of meaning, cueing, and context. It wasn't that these educators didn't care. They simply didn't know what brain science was beginning to reveal about reading.
Honestly, we practiced reading aloud to students with excitement and joy in our your voice. That was what we were told daily. In my Literacy 101 class, we were discouraged from stopping to talk about the words' meanings or the picture that related to the words we were reading. We spent hours in our college classes building experiential centers that pertained to many different subjects that were to be shared during the language arts time period each day. It was just build that language around. So we had these fancy backdrops and we would paste, or we finally found Velcro so you could take pictures off and on, and you had to build whole learning sessions, and they were to be done during literacy. Did we get to the end? I thought, not sure what I just taught them, but hopefully they learned something about reading.
Can you help explain in simple terms for parents listening why those balanced literacy methods didn't work for kids like Cooper?
I didn't know how to show him or tell him that letters had sounds mapped. I, at that point in time, and I think most teachers still think it's visual, that if they can say the name of the letters of the alphabet or sing the song, they've got it down. But it honestly starts with the sound, and the sound in language begins to develop at the brain level at the age of identifying it at birth. That's why reading to your child when they're young and doing a lot of talking and showing is critical, because the brain's job is to start to pull those little sounds. The brain has to understand the sound of that letter before it can identify that letter and then use that letter to read with. So this whole misunderstanding to balance literacy was it's visual. The eyes see and transfer to the brain the shape of that letter, and somehow with just pointing to it and exposing it and saying that letter at the beginning of the word is a T, although it's attached to an H, so it actually says or the. But if you've taught letter matching and not to sounds, the brain has no idea what to do with that.
The cost of that knowledge gap? Children misunderstood, mislabeled, and left behind. The consequences of waiting. If your child is struggling to read, you are not alone, and it's not your fault. According to the 2024 National Assessment of Education Progress Scores, otherwise known as the NAEP scores, 72% of Kansas fourth graders aren't reading at a proficient level. Nationally, it's 68%. That means nearly 3 out of 4 kids in our state haven't mastered the kind of reading they need to thrive. And a proficient score on the National Assessment of Educational Progress isn't just a technical label. It means a student can understand what he or she reads, analyze or interpret meaning, draw inferences and make conclusions, the kinds of thinking required not just in reading class, but in every subject that follows. By 4th grade, kids are expected to make the leap from learning to read to reading to learn. If they haven't crossed the bridge, they start to slip in science, in social studies, in self-confidence. And the way we teach children to read is causing them to fail. Most teacher prep programs don't cover dyslexia. They don't give future educators the tools to catch reading struggles early or teach in a way that works for all brains. Without early intervention, the risks compound. Self-doubt, behavior issues, misdiagnoses, even school dropouts. But here's the hope. When we identify dyslexia early and respond with the right instruction, kids can succeed, not just in reading, but in life. The science is clear, the tools exist, and our Kansas kids are worth the change.
I'm Cooper Phillips, and I was diagnosed with severe dyslexia at a very young age. But fortunately, I had a very supporting mother who really went the extra mile to teach me how to read. And I've since learned that those early challenges have led to traits that have become incredibly impactful to me and later in my career and life.
Fortunately, I was diagnosed at a fairly young age, so early intervention helped, but that also means I don't remember a lot of the specifics all too clearly. What I do remember, though, is constantly feeling sick at school. Looking back, I think it was less about physical illness and more about the emotional toll, primarily guilt. I genuinely believed that my struggles with reading and my inability to distinguish letters were somehow my fault. At that age, you don't really understand the science or biology behind learning differences. All you know is that something that seems so easy for everyone around you feels impossible to you. And that can be pretty heavy on a kid. Watching the kids excel around me in my class made it painfully clear that I was different. And I wasn't the only one who noticed. Teachers treated me differently too. In a class of 22 students in the early 90s, they didn't have the training or resources to support someone who struggled the way that I did. So during reading time, I'd often be pulled out to the side to do my own thing, whether it was like crafting or drawing, anything really besides reading. But I think I was too young to feel frustrated the way I understand it now. Like I mentioned earlier, what I remember the most is feeling overwhelmed by guilt. I didn't understand why reading was so hard for me, and I assumed it had to be something I was doing wrong. I wasn't trying to avoid learning. I just didn't feel like I belonged in the same space as everyone else in the class.
1 in 5 children has dyslexia, yet most teacher prep programs barely cover it. 70% of students who struggle with reading in early grades never catch up. Misdiagnoses like ADHD, behavior disorders, and emotional disturbance are common for undiagnosed dyslexics. Jeanine, can you tell us the common myths about how dyslexics read?
I'd be delighted to do that. I'm correcting people all the time. So the most common reported by everybody on the street is that dyslexic individuals read backwards, that letters slip, they run off the page. So a total myth. It's not visual, it's language-based. The second one is we don't read well. That's true, but with intervention, we read very well. We can learn to do that. Couldn't go to college. I was told that personally. So that is a belief system, in the belief system that dyslexics are set up to go to trade schools, not to college. And I had an 8th grade teacher tell me that. A slow learner, that's one of those things, if you don't learn to read well, you don't learn like the others do. So oftentimes that's where kids go, to special education. Left-handed, that's a total myth. It has nothing to do with dyslexia at all. We see right-handed, left-handed individuals. Can't tell right from left. That's an early skill you learn when you're very young, and those two words just blend together and sound the same. I was shamed in ballet class that I couldn't go left or right and remember, so still to this day, I have to look at my hand and all my rings to remember right. It's just a trained brain thing is what it is. Unmotivated when it comes to print, that's true too. But for me, being dyslexic, give me anything on dyslexia, science, anything. I love reading it. I don't want to listen to it. I want to read it. Outgrew it? No, I did not outgrow it. And I hear that all the time. I did overcome its difficulties, but again, I'm still dyslexic. The final one, and I hear it often, is it's a disease type thing, something you can catch, something you can pass on to somebody, which genetically we can pass on dyslexia, but it's not a disease. So when I'm working with kids, I always tell them, remember, this isn't a disease. It's a marker that's like your thumbprint. It's specific to you. More common in boys. We used to believe that. We now know it's expect just as many girls as boys. So those are all myths, basically, when somebody doesn't understand what dyslexia really is.
What training changes? But here's the good news. Change is happening right here in Kansas. When Jeanine discovered the science of reading and received alphabetic phonics literacy training, everything changed. She founded the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center with Gretchen Andeal to help other kids and families.
Once I knew how the brain learns to read, I could finally help my son and hundreds of other kids.
Today, I'm a director of product management for a home appliance company that makes fans, heaters, humidifiers, air cleaners, things of that nature. And honestly, I believe dyslexia gave me a real edge, especially later in college and now in the business world. With all the tools available today, spelling and grammar just aren't the same barriers that they might have been at one point. What matters more is resourcefulness, problem solving, thinking outside the box, skills that tend to come naturally to people with dyslexia. Add in a lifetime of needing to work harder than your peers, and that work ethic becomes a powerful asset to you as well. That said, it's not like everything magically gets easier after college. I still find that my brain sometimes moves faster than I can articulate my thoughts, especially in meetings. Slowing down to translate ideas into the right words is something that I always have to be working on. Dyslexia doesn't go away, but over time, you learn how to manage it. And in doing so, you begin to realize the way you think can actually be a unique strength.
Jeanine Phillips' story reminds us it's not just about one child, one parent, or one teacher. It's about a system and what happens when the system fails to teach the code. But it's also about what happens next, when people finally do learn the truth, when a parent stops blaming themselves, when a teacher gets the training they were never given, and when a child starts to believe they can read. In our next episode, we explore what happens when struggling readers are misunderstood, when behavior issues, emotional outbursts, or zoning out are mistaken for defiance or disability. You'll hear from students, parents, and educators who lived through the heartbreak of not knowing the cause of their literacy struggles and failure were due to dyslexia, which was misunderstood, undiagnosed, and certainly not remediated. Once someone finally helped them find clarity and connection, there was a way forward. Because sometimes the child we think is the problem isn't the problem at all. Thanks for listening to My Child Can't Read, a Heartland Crisis. If today's episode resonated with you, if you saw yourself, your child, or your classroom in these stories, you're not alone. We believe every child can learn to read, and every parent and teacher deserves the knowledge to help them. I invite you to take action today by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode, rate and review to help others find this series, and tell us about your story and discover how the Phillips Fundamental Learning Center is changing lives through literacy at funlearn.org/podcast. That's funlearn.org/podcast. And share this show with a friend, teacher, or fellow parent who needs to hear it. All resources, source credits, and tools mentioned in this episode can be found in the show notes. Remember, together we can rewrite the story one reader at a time right here in the Heartland.